So, I heard really good things about the Black Mirror episode U.S.S Callister. Fans and critics seem to be in love with this Star Trek parody, and I wanted to see if it holds up. Full disclosure, I don't like Black Mirror. There's a pervasive myth around modern sci-fi that the genre was full of bright optimism and a better tomorrow, right up until basically the point where the person making this point was aware of things. That's just not true. The vast majority of sci-fi is, and always has been, depressing. The genre had its start with Frankenstein, which is a story about how a scientist's creation gets out of hand and he has to live in fear of what he created. Not exactly optimistic. It didn't get any more lively as the wheel turned. The War of the Worlds and The Day the Earth Stood Still are both stories where the human race was 15 minutes from death, and they were the optimistic ones. The depressive nature of 70s sci-fi is well known.
We now return to the end of a depressing 1970s sci-fi movie starring a guy in a turtleneck.
No! We'll never defeat the corporation! They've won!
There is one way, Adson. You can shoot yourself.
If it's the only way, I must.
The reason we have this image of the past being more optimistic, like in general, not just sci-fi, is survivorship bias. The basic formula for sci-fi in this vein is to see a new technology, invent a way it might be misused, and when it's not misused, become forgotten. Meaning the only sci-fi that gets remembered are the ones that aren't definitively wrong. Black Mirror is definitely in this vein. That combined with the "Do you get it?" name leave me unimpressed with the show in general. So if it seems like I'm going into this wanting to hate it, yeah, a little. That said, this is what the critical reviews of this episode seem to be. It's sitting at a 94 on Rotten Tomatoes, no audience score that I can find, 95 on Metacritic with no audience again, but IMDb has it at an 8.3, which is almost all audience. As a critic pleaser, my only assumption is it'll probably talk down to me. Probably some political point will be made, or a good old moral panic. Still, I'm assuming the direction will be good, the effects will be well used, and the acting will be good. That's common for Black Mirror, I just think the writing is bad. Reading through the reviews, there's just a lot of explaining of the plot. People obviously talking about how it's a Star Trek parody. Many saying it's what we need for this age of the toxic fan. The Orville gets mentioned a few times, some making comparisons to the main character Daly and Seth MacFarlane.
If you don't let the girl go, I will track you down, I will find you, and I will kill you.
Our villain, everyone! Other than that, critics like to point out the main character's toxic masculinity, male rage, or masculine power fantasy. Someone even mentioned Gamergate, which seems to me like you should get a new witch to burn, but that's the stereotype the main character wants to invoke, it would appear. There's not a lot to say about the written reviews. If you've seen one, you've seen them all. Beyond bizarre comparisons to Toy Story of all things, these all read the same. I don't know if it's because they're all copying each other or they all think the same. Regardless, the written reviews are really uninspired. The TLDR though? Feminism good, toxic fanboys bad. Moving on to the video reviews. These are a lot more interesting. The comparisons make a lot more sense too. Like to the Twilight Zone episode, It's a Good Life, or that one episode of the Justice League cartoon that ripped it off. A few people made comparisons to TNG episodes like Barkley and Ship in a Bottle. Ironic that you're parodying Star Trek and they did your idea first. Lessons from the Screenplay uses it as an example of how dialogue often needs to serve a dual purpose. Good advice, regardless of your opinion on this show. Trexpertise makes a comparison to the classic book, classic meaning no one reads it, Don Quixote, which, if you've never read it, is basically the 1600s version of video games cause sexism, or violence, or D&D causes satanic worship, or rock and roll inspires sexual misconduct. Radio will cause kids to become delusional, and writing retards your memory. But you know, about chivalric epics. Okay, seriously, if you don't know what Don Quixote is, watch Red from Overly Sarcastic Productions explain it to you. I'll link to that. Suffice it to say, I'm not a fan, and this video by Trexpertise has me more worried than anything. The video reviews are much better than the written ones, though. All these written reviews felt like they were towing a progressive line, whereas these feel like people are actually putting thought into their conclusions, regardless of if I agree with them in the end. What am I expecting, though? Honestly, a mean-spirited version of Galaxy Quest. I'm not going into this unbiased, I'm not going to lie.
Cole, welcome aboard. Crew, we have a new member of the team.
We meet again, Captain Daly! We're trapped.
Jesus,
Space Fleet never turns its back on those who need our help.
3 cheers for Captain Daly. Hip hip, hooray! Hooray!
Dude, that movie sucked.
Let it never be said that I can't admit when I'm wrong. Galaxy Quest as a film works because of the arcs the main character goes through. You see, the crew starts out as vain and egotistical and fails to engage with the actual themes of the show. As time goes on, they start to understand their place in the crew is not a bad one, and they lose their egos. Then they come together as a crew and engage with the themes of the show, become their best selves, and save the day. Take that, Jimmy What's-It from Facebook. Who the hell is that reference for? The U.S.S Callister really is that a-hole it's pretending to criticize. Yeah, I hate it for completely different reasons than I expected. It's arrogant, vain, and fails to actually engage with the themes of Star Trek. What do I mean by that? Well, Star Trek is very fond of ethical dilemmas. Now, there's a setup here for an excellent ethical dilemma. There's a point where the protagonist figures she can blackmail the real-life version of herself with pictures she doesn't want to get out.
I know the password, obviously. There's some pretty interesting images on there that I should have deleted a while ago, but I didn't.
So, we can blackmail me. I'm pretty sure that I'd do anything to keep those photos from getting out.
And this helps to cause the death of Robert Daly. Now, what Star Trek would do is ask, is it okay to blackmail someone into being party to a murderer to save lives? Good question. Nobody even brings this up. The potential is there to make an argument along the lines of,
The needs of the many outweigh
The needs of the few.
but nobody even attempts to justify this beyond, well, screw you.
But you threw my son out of an airlock, so fuck you to death.
Side note, it's weird that you would make Spock, who's supposed to be a Stoic, give us a utilitarian argument. Stoics were virtue ethicists. Whatever, this isn't about that. Ethically, this puts the heroes on the same path as the villains. I want to stress that I mean ethically, not morally. The easiest way to explain this is they're all on the same path with their willingness to ruin other people's lives for expediency, and I don't mean just killing Daly here. I mean you also blackmailed this lady into, at best, manslaughter, but what is very likely murder. Our heroes, everyone, they'll blackmail you into committing murder. Daly is just much further down that path. The best revenge is to be unlike him who formed the injury. So no, I don't think this was a mean-spirited Galaxy Quest. It was a well-acted, well-directed Duke Nukem Forever. Though people are right, this is what I've come to expect from Black Mirror.